First of all, I'm really curious who is working on a sample right now? Okay, who is planning to apply to the Berkeley Film Foundation this cycle? Good. Okay, good. So we wanted to give you a little bit of, context on why this came to be, and Isabella talked a little bit. Aside from an editor, I have been a reviewer for the Berkeley Film Foundation, BAVAC, Video Consortium, and we saw the same things over and over again, or different things that we thought we could help you guys out. But sometimes it's really hard to give a one-on-one, and there's really so little resources online about samples, which is such an important tool of the entire process, right? Applying for funding, getting the money, you need a sample. So there's a lot about trailers, movie structures, but not samples. So we really thought a lot with Stephanie here and how we can help out, and we hope we do it.
Hi, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I think one important thing, and primarily as an editor, to remember is it's not a one-stop shopping kind of thing. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking or sort of focusing on this evening is all of the sort of different ways and different approaches you can attack your sample reel based on where you are in your project, what your funding is presently, and a number of other things. Okay, so I'm first. So what are the goals of a sample reel? We thought we'd start with that. Why create a sample reel? And it's funny because when Melina and I first tossed that question out, my first answer was to get money, right? Like you're trying to raise money so that you can either continue your production or continue your post-production. There's a number of different reasons why you might be creating your sample reel. And so generally, sample reels will be a foundational requirement of any grant you are submitting to. So generally, it's something you're just going to have to sort of put together no matter what, and you'll need to be familiar with almost no matter what sort of film you are applying for funds for. But there's another reason why you might want to be creating a sample reel. And when you are creating a sample reel, because they are expensive to create in terms of time, your precious time, and possibly an editor's time, which you could be paying for, it's important to realize that you might be able to multitask your sample reel as well. And that would be to generate interest, word of mouth in your film, share it with your friends, with your family. If you're raising funds, maybe you've got a Kickstarter thing going or something, you can always have a little click here button on your sample reel, post it on Instagram. So it's, raising awareness about your film. You might want to be team building. You could use a sample reel, for instance, if you're going to be wanting to hire a DP, or, some DPs are going to want to see what you are trying to put together. So it's to generate team building. Your editor might want to see a sample reel for your full film. Here's what I've got. Are you interested in this project? Do you want to see more? Developing outreach partnerships. So after your film is done or close to when your film is done and you're nearing completion, how are you going to show your film? How's it going to get out into the world? So you might want to be able to repurpose or think about repurposing that same sample reel at the end of your project. And then finally, again, as I was saying, word of mouth. Just to spread word of mouth about your film and your project and excitement, especially here in the Bay Area. We're a small group of film. You find out it's a very tightly knit, we wind up being a pretty small group of filmmakers around here. So spreading word of mouth is super helpful for, sharing resources and pats on the back, which keep you going, So that's sort of the goals. Why create a sample reel? The next question I thought I'd clarify is, well, what is a sample reel? And I thought I'd start by saying what a sample reel isn't, because a sample reel is not a trailer. Those are two very different beasts, right? A trailer, and the first sort of practical way that they're different is a trailer generally is anywhere from 90 seconds to 3 minutes long. It's going to have a lot more whiz-bang. It's going to be a lot more sort of grabby. It's to sort of generate a quick emotional reaction, and I'm speaking generally here. And it's not going to have a very deep exploration of the content of your film, right? It's really just to be like, you leave a trailer and you're like, whoa, I want to see that film, right? You may not be able to say what it's about. You just might think it's cool, and that's sort of the job of a trailer. A sample reel has a different approach. A sample reel is generally, you're asked to limit yourself generally to 8 to 10 minutes. That doesn't mean you have to take up that whole 8 to 10 minutes, but what it means is that as the director or as the editor, you have the real estate to explore the characters, the ideas being explored in your film, and you also have an opportunity to show a little bit more of some of the techniques you think you're going to be using in your film. So that's sort of the fundamental thing. You have whereas the trailer again can be a lot more sort of smoke and mirrors. The sample reel is going to aim to show your approach to filmmaking. You're going to try to get that across in your sample reel. This is my approach to filmmaking. This is going to be my approach to storytelling. And you're also using it to demonstrate that you have access to your story. If you're making a documentary, you have access to the story you're trying to tell. Here are my great interviews I've got. Here's the school I'm going to be able to film in for a year. Here's the town I've been invited to visit. And it also will show some of the styles you're going to be employing. Are you going to be using verite scenes? Are you doing traditional sit-down interviews? Are you doing animation? It's because you have more real estate, you can sort of explore these techniques that you're going to be using a little bit more in a sample reel. And primarily, what you want to do in a sample reel and what you want to be getting across most clearly is who are your main characters and what is the arc of their journey. So that's what you really want to be taking away from the sample. And what's important to remember is that as you are doing those two very simple things, you need to do it in a way that's also showing how you're going to do it in the film. So what your filmmaking is and everything else that I've just described.
All right. So yeah, in a way, we also thought with Stephanie, what should the sample reel really demonstrate and what effect should it have in the audience, and especially reviewers who are the ones that are greenlighting your project. So one of the most important things is that, as she said, you need to show that you have an interesting story, right? Also that you have really interesting characters, or engaging in some way that it sparkles some kind of interest in us as reviewers. Also that your material is evocative and compelling. Even if you're doing historical documentaries, we need to see something there. And one of the most important things I would say is to show that your story can sustain either a short or a feature documentary. Because what happens a lot of times, and what we've seen as reviewers, is sometimes if you show everything, then we're like, oh, okay, this 10-minute sample is already a short doc. Why would it be a short doc? Or again, oh, is there enough material to be for this to be a feature? So it's really important, and we'll talk later on, to have that kind of, almost at the end, having want us to watch more. So okay. There are two basic principles which we thought about. And the first one would be that the sample reel should feel a little bit different from your written application. It should not be exactly the same. You should use it as two different tools. It's the opportunity to complement your written application and expand our understanding of the story, especially as reviewers. I'm thinking more as a reviewer than an editor, but usually when you apply, it's with both things at the same time. And the second rule is to keep it simple, to make it really understandable, for it to be polished. Again, you want us to finish that sample, wanting us to watch way more than what we've seen. And another important thing is that you don't really have to explore every angle of your story. You can pick whatever resonates with you or you think it's most important for us to watch. And the two other things which are really important is that as Stephanie said, you don't have to fill that entire 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. I've seen so many times you have a beautiful narrative arc that's maybe 8 minutes, and at the end you have that desire to put some unedited interview bites, and that's the aftertaste we get as reviewers. So if you have really good edited minutes, I would rather you have present that. And the other thing would be the opposite. Don't go over whatever time you are asked for, because as reviewers, we're not required to watch 20 minutes. Usually we're required to watch either 10 or 15. So some reviewers do it, but when you have 60 applications to review, it's really smart to keep it down to those times.
So how to begin crafting a sample reel? What's step one? So the first question I ask if a director approaches me about cutting a sample is I will say, what stage of filmmaking are you in? Are you in the magical thinking phase where you don't have anything shot yet and you need to get money to even begin? Or are you somewhere in post-production where you can actually be lifting scenes and lifting two or three of your favorite scenes and plopping them right into your reel, and you're done. What your approach is should match where you are in the arc of your filmmaking process, and I would say be honest with yourself and your audience about where you are in this arc of completion. Right? If you only have interviews, only use interviews. Maybe if you feel like you could put a little music under them or something, but be honest about where you are in the stage and lift your best material from there. Complementing that, I would say, if you only have interviews, but you're going to be using archival or something like that, and you can easily go out and access something, you can think creatively sort of that way and say, okay, well, I've only shot these interviews, but I know I'm going to be using some archival, so let me grab some of that, be sure to credit it, and put that in your reel as well. But I would say that don't try to resist the impulse to spend more time creating something that isn't your film, because creative energy is expensive, editor's time is expensive. I'm going to say that a lot tonight. And you want to make the best use of your resources and your time. And finally, the question to ask is, what is your budget? So if you're hiring an editor, the decision about the type of sample you create might be constrained by the amount of time you can afford to be in the edit room. And I'll talk more about working with an editor in the second part. But that's important. That's an important question to ask as well. Are you trying to do this for a very limited amount of funds, or do you have some money in your budget that you can hire an editor for a week or two? So that's another question you'll need to ask yourself.
All right. And as Stephanie was saying before, there isn't like one way that's correct or incorrect to do it. There's different approaches, and there's, I would say, 3 approaches I have seen in all the samples I have watched. One is, and we'll go into detail on each of them, but one is this mini narrative arc or story that's almost like, usually it has a beginning, middle, and end, 3-act story. Again, we'll go into that. Then another one is having, best, strongest scenes, but really well edited, back to back, that shows the potential of your story. And then there's the hybrid one, which is usually a combination. Some people have a trailer and then a little mini arc, or a teaser and then a little bit of story development. So in general, these are the 3, I have seen. Okay, so as I was saying, the mini narrative arc or story, the sample has a beginning, middle, and end. In many cases, it's this little 3-act structure, but it is a little bit different than a film itself, and I'll go over why I think that's different. The characters, again, are presented in the context of the story, which is really good. There might be scenes and interviews which are integrated to the story. And as Stephanie was saying, we can see our artistic choices. Sometimes, how you would use archival, music, graphics. If you have any kind of animation and have some sketches, you could include that, especially if you are requesting money for animation as well. So the way I personally would approach this is I would have an act one where it's the setup. This would be the same as in a film where you set up the story, the theme, you introduce the characters or a main character. It depends if it's a community. And again, you make us love these characters and embark on their quest in a way. That is, the act two would be the development. What are the obstacles this character would have to overcome, and the challenges of the story. And then the act three, I would say here is where I feel it differs from a normal documentary movie, and I'll explain why. Because you really need to leave the reviewer wanting to see more. If you already have that resolution and you tell us how the story ends, then again we might feel that's the entire story. So what else? Yep. Another important thing is if you actually have a historical documentary which is archival heavy, you really, I think the approach you would have is you should let us know why you think that story is important, why it should be widely known, why now. Sometimes we have to reinterpret the story again because there's a political, socioeconomic reason why we want to explore that story again, and the impact it could have on society right now if we told that story. Okay, approach number two. These are the best and strongest scenes that you would lift, as Stephanie was saying, from your film. They would have some kind of, it's not any scene you would put there. It needs to have some emotional element, something that will tell us your story, your film has a lot of potential. Again, another important thing would be if your main character is shown as, really strong and in the community and in action, that would be a really good scene to have as well. And then, again, as Stephanie was saying, some scenes that show your artistic approach of how you would edit a scene in your film. So that could, be a good thing too. And the hybrid one was what I was telling you before. It's just a combination of different things. Sometimes you have a little trailer that you already cut and then some strong scenes. Sometimes you have a teaser and then a small narrative arc. So it's kind of like choosing in between those things. And maybe you want to tell us, we had this discussion of what personally we think is the best. I don't know, what's your opinion?
I'm not sure that there's any best approach. I think what you need to think about is economics of your time and your creative energy, and again, where you are in the filmmaking process. If you, I have been hired to spend a month on a sample reel. I mean, and that is like something that's to generate, huge amounts of grant funding. So the feeling was that it was worth it. And so when you're doing that, you really are diving in and sort of creating this like mini film in a way. And I think that although effective, it was also an excessive use of, it was like that's sort of the extreme on one end. I think that the way I would generally approach a reel is, again, it's the title of this seminar, is how do you make a compelling sample reel? And you just have to be thinking all the time, Is this compelling? Am I compelling an audience to want to watch that? And so for me, I feel like the first thing you can do if you have a trailer, that can be a very effective 90-second use of the 8 or 10 minutes that you have to start at the beginning of the sample reel. I always like to make sure that the title of the film, if it's not the first thing you see, it's what comes up right after your trailer or the first sort of whiz bang thing that you use at the sort of the opening of your reel. And then again, I mean, I recently was just working with a director who had nothing but interviews and a couple of verite scenes, and they wanted to just not have a limit on themselves and have a 25-minute, my best bites all lined up in a row like Lincoln Logs. And we narrowed that down to what I ended up feeling like was a very compelling, just talking heads. But these heads could talk, and they were saying stuff that really grabbed you. And I'm a strong believer in that. If what something someone is saying is compelling, that's really, you don't need to do much more than that. So have something at the front that grabs you, and then if you've got the material, great. But don't kill yourself trying to create something that isn't your film. I say that all the time to directors. Like, use what you've got to the best effect.
Yeah. And to that, I would add or say too, like, consider how much time you have to edit that sample and be smart. If you know you have 2 or 3 really strong scenes, maybe that's better having back to back. If you have a little more time and you can do that mini narrative arc, I would say as a reviewer that works really well, because we want to, we also want to be entertained watching that. So as much as, you might have sometimes great interviews and you're reading the application without some context and making it fun for us, I think that helps too.
I think that to that end, if you are lifting your scenes, I think that they should be sort of part and parcel, matching the same thing that Melina said. They should appear in narrative form, right? Like, they should appear in order of the arc of your film, so that you're sort of showing us how your film is going to evolve by these scenes that you've selected, beginning, middle, and end. So they shouldn't just be your favorite. You should, be trying to use these scenes to give a sense of the narrative arc of your film. Sample reel don'ts. What not to present in your sample reel. So I think that what is really important to remember is that as much as we love our films that we're creating, it's our job to make everybody else love them. So you can't just sort of unpack your groceries on the kitchen counter and think everybody's going to think they're as amazing as you do. So it's really important that whatever you are showing, if it doesn't have immediate context, it's going to need context. So don't just have interviewers talking to me about something that, like, I'm just listening to them trying to catch up, right? So make sure that whatever you're presenting, if it's an interview bite in the middle of your reel, I need to understand why I'm hearing it. If you are presenting interview bites, don't use just jump cuts. Don't slap them all together and, unedited, or like with your radio. Don't present a radio cut in a reel, right? So if you have an interview that will only, if you don't have 2 cameras and it will only work cut up, I think creatively about how to cover that interview or present it in a way that that is watchable. As Melina said, reviewers are watching dozens of these, and everything that you put in this reel is saying to the reviewers, this is how I'm going to make this film. So you can sort of include the dog ate my homework stuff in your treatment, your written treatment. This is all I've got. So you can sort of make apologies for what you might think are some of the shortcomings of your footage right now, but don't put that in the reel. The reel just has to be the best stuff. And don't put in unpolished scenes or material. It's the same thing as the interviews. Like, if you're gonna include a scene, spend time refining that scene and make it watchable. Like, I think as you're putting this reel together, in the back of your mind or in the front of your mind all the time, be thinking of respecting your audience's time and energy. Like, if I'm going to ask somebody to watch this, I want to make it watchable, so that people feel like this wasn't presented to them and you didn't care, that it was just sort of this perfunctory thing. And then lastly, unless you are applying for a finishing grant, don't, as Melina has already said, don't submit more than the end limit of time that you've been given for a sample reel. Do not submit your full film unless, and say, just stop at 10 minutes or something, like, unless you've been asked to submit the full film, don't do that. I mean, it's a sort of like presumptuous thing that could just make a reviewer say they don't know how to read instructions first. So, and as Melina said, they're only required to watch the first 10 or 15 minutes. And that being said, I will also say, if you are submitting a film, and they will allow the first 10 or 15 minutes. As someone who was reviewing for the Emmys last year, I will say that you're given the opportunity to, if you want, if you're like done, you can turn these things off after 20 minutes. So it's something to think about as you're making your actual film, that your first 10 minutes should be, you really need to do a lot of work in that first 10 minutes. You're setting a lot of the rules of the filmmaking, but more than anything, you're grabbing and engaging your audience. And if you've done that, yes, of course.
If you do submit the entire film because you're applying for finishing funds, as she was saying, it takes a little time to get into the film. So maybe the 10 and 15 minutes at the beginning are not the best. So if that's the case, at least put a note to watch a different part of the full film, because that would help.
Okay, so sample reel dues. On to the positives. And as I was writing these out as we were working on this, it occurs to me, like, a lot of this is common sense, but it's good to be reminded of common sense because, again, like, I think we can also have a tendency to be in love with our own project so much that you forget that, we actually have a job of encouraging the audience to want to love this as much as we do. So think about it in terms of respecting your viewer. Polish this as much as you can. Reviewers don't expect that you're going to have a professionally color-corrected or professionally mixed sample reel. But these days, I think most editing programs have very good color-correct capabilities, even for the most novice of us. So, there's like buttons that you can just push and it's like done very quickly. Same with your mix. And in a way, the mix is almost more important. If you've got crappy audio and your reviewer can't hear or understand what's being said, there's almost nothing worse. It's so aggravating to listen to. So really make sure that your mix is that, your music is leveled, you've chosen the right microphone for your export. Watch your export from beginning to end. It's a habit of mine that I've developed, like, from day one. I'll watch a full film from beginning to end, more than once when it goes through mix. So watch your sample reel and just make sure there's no bizarre hotspots or, black frames or things that you've missed. Think about your reviewer and have put the extra 10 minutes in to make sure you're handing in a polished piece of work. These days, a lot of DPs will shoot flat. Don't include flat footage in your reel. Put a LUT on it. And if you don't know what the LUT is, you can look it up. Go through the exercise of at least doing that much. You don't have to do the full color balancing, but you can, like, pop your footage to life by throwing the LUTs on it. And then I've already mentioned, so, choose the correct microphones, get rid of any background noise you can, make it listenable, and pay attention to the jump cuts. And then again, this is to what Melina was saying. Reviewers are going to watch 20 to 60 sample reels per grant cycle. So technical glitches are distracting, and when you're watching this many, it's an easy write-off. If you've got a mistake in there, it's like, the reviewer is going to say to themselves, this person is sloppy. And so, it's an easy thing to do on your part to make that kind of cleanup work, and it goes a long way. And as Melina could say, the sample reel is heavily weighted on the score sheet for the grant, and it can be up to 50% of the decision-making factors. So it really does you a lot of good to pay attention to these little details. Okay, if you're not sick of my voice yet, I'm going to talk a little bit about title cards. So there can be a real tendency to lean on title cards, right? Like title cards are a very easy way of, imparting whatever information you want to get across to your audience. But you're not submitting a PowerPoint presentation, right? Like, so the only reason you should use a title card is if there's absolutely necessary exposition. Your audience is not sitting down to watch a Star Wars where they're going to do like a 2-minute, here's where we were, here's the background you need. Only if it's absolutely critical should you begin with a title card. And only if it's absolutely critical exposition in the body of your piece should you include title cards. And by title cards, I mean text cards, cards that give exposition or background. If you can't explain it any other way, if you feel like you have an important piece of information that you don't have a subject saying yet, you could use a title card, but I would really advise against it. I mean, I really advise to only use them for necessary context to understand what's coming next. And again, if it's information that cannot be imparted succinctly and economically in a soundbite, if you don't have a soundbite saying it, then okay, use a title card. But in almost every case, default to a bite if you can, as opposed to using a title card. So in a sample reel, this isn't a hard and fast rule. Like there's no hard and fast rules, but if you're gonna use cards, don't use more than 3. Or maybe 4. But I almost want to say don't use any, unless you really have to. And we often do. I mean, it's fine, but don't begin your sample reel thinking, okay, I'm going to fill in the blanks with cards. Think about filling it in with filmmaking, and make sure that they're not too fast. If you're going to have text on screen, you want people to be able to read it. And I'll share, as an editor, I'll share my little trick, what I use for text on screen. I'll create the text on screen, and then I'll leave it up there on the window, and I will start a timer, and I'll just read it out loud to myself. Read the past, read it, say the words, and then I'll go 1, 2, and then I'll hit stop. So that, to me, basically is pretty good. That's a pretty good minute. You want it up just a little bit longer than it needs to be, but only that teeny little bit, because you don't want people to have to go back to it. But you definitely don't want it up there too long either. I know, right? It's like, what's that perfect balance? But that's my trick. Read it out loud slowly, as if you're reading to your 8-year-old nephew, and then go 1, 2. And if you've got a title card that's got exposition that might be tense, or if it's exposition that's uplifting, or whatever the nature of the exposition is, maybe think about putting some bit of either non-distracting music or some bit of non-distracting ambient dialogue, like if you're in a submarine or something like that, to sort of help lift, to add a little bottom end to your title card, so it's not just dead weight on screen. So you don't want something that's so distracting that your reviewer isn't going to be able to read it. But if you do that little like a little audio touch under there, I feel like is a nice little bit of filmmaking that can help ease in and out of the title cards. I'm also a big fan of fading in and out of title cards, as opposed to just like little touches like that help make them easier to read, more pleasant to the eye. And then when not to use title cards. What you don't want to have in the reel is like, here's everything I wish I'd shot, or here's everything that I'm gonna shoot, or like what you don't have, sort of like making excuses in your reel. Don't tell me what's coming. That is what your treatment is for, and it's really important to remember, and this is sort of the last, what we'll end on before we go to Q&A, is everything you put in your reel, everything that you're asking your reviewer to watch is signaling. It's a signal to the reviewer of what kind of filmmaker you are and what kind of film this is. So it's really important to just keep reminding yourself of that every frame you're asking the reviewer to look at is an indication of what you are aiming to create as a filmmaker. And so you don't want to use the cards as a crutch, because you don't get crutches in your film. Okay? Great.
Yeah, I don't know. We wanted to do almost like 2 Q&As, one before the break, because we covered a lot, and then another one. So yeah, are there any questions so far? Okay, yes.
You mentioned a radio cut. What's a radio cut?
What's a radio cut? That's such a great question. So a radio cut, if you picture closing your eyes or picture like listening to NPR in the morning, right? That's the radio. And you hear stories, but you don't get any pictures, right? So that's a radio cut. You're listening to a story on the radio. Films have this extra added layer of picture, right? But generally the first step in making a documentary is often creating a radio cut. So it's lining up all of your interview bites in order, not worrying about the picture yet, right? It's just, here is the order in which my ideas are going to unfold. And I don't care what it looks like. You can, turn the picture off to watch, or, close your eyes, whatever. It's like, does this make sense as an audio cut? So that's generally the first step. And so that's what a radio cut is. Does that make sense?
Well, if it's part of the process of, you said that's sometimes the first thing that you do is lay down your audio cut?
Yeah. Well, I'll lay down I will lay down interview bites. So not like audio without the interview. I'll lay it out, but I'm not worrying about the picture yet. I'm just worrying about the content. Does the content make sense in this order?
So you're saying not radio cuts.
Right. So the reason you would not want to present a radio cut as your final piece is that the radio cut is the first step. The radio cut is here's me sitting home alone putting this thing together. Does it sound like it's all in the right order? Okay, I like how this sounds. Now I'm going to put the pictures in. Or I'm going to leave this guy talking on screen here, but I'm going to cover him with a flowering maple tree here. That sort of thing. So, yeah. Yes.
It sounds like you have those A, B, C of the different types of sample reels. But if you use a hybrid, how do you draw those, the teaser and the trailer, how do you kind of connect them in a way they're separate things.
I know they're separate things. That's why personally I wouldn't suggest it, but a lot of people do it. If you already have like a trailer that's already been edited and you have it ready, or you have a teaser that's ready, and then you want to add 2 or 3 scenes or a mini narrative arc, we have seen people do that. Sometimes it works to some extent. But again, yeah.
I will too. I'll also add just by saying fading to black is, like you just fade to black, or after a trailer, if you're doing a trailer open, you tell me the name of the title of your film, right? So trailer, title of the film, fade to black. I mean, I think you're going to be fading to black if you're doing a scene select too, right? You're not just going to chunk them in there. You want to do a little bit of elegant.
Right. I saw a hybrid once and I struggled with it because they just use the same footage too much. And I just saw the same scenes in the trailer, maybe even repeated twice in the trailer and then repeated again after that in the narrative arc. And that really, it was pretty off-putting. So that's what I would say too.
That I think falls into the category of use common sense, like if you've got 10 minutes to get something across to people, you definitely do not want to play something more than once. Like I had a friend once, way back when we used to, when the reason I had the slide, like what's the difference between a trailer and a sample reel, was because when Melina first asked me to join her for this, I thought my brain just went to edit reels. Like as an editor 25 years ago, I had a VHS. That was my like calling card. I'd give people a VHS of like little trailers that I had cut and stuff. And a friend shared his with me, and 3 times in his edit reel, he used this U2 song, Beautiful Day, because he loved the song, and like it worked so well with each of his things, right? But I was like, you're telling me you can't make choices by doing this. So, yeah. So.
And one more thing would be if you end up using the hybrid mode, which as you heard might not be the best, but if you have that material, it's best to, as they were saying, have a title card and say trailer and the running time like 2 minutes, and then selected scenes 8 minutes. But you would explain that they are different things.
You mean with the title card?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just finished my first film, so I spent the last 2 years applying, but I haven't gotten that much feedback. We had at one point had someone who was a reviewer look at our sample, and she suggested that we put text cards between the scenes, because that had never even occurred to us before. And then we got into this whole discussion of like, oh yeah, right, because maybe, this is sort of multi-question, maybe some reviewers are watching the sample first and they haven't read your treatment, or maybe, because I have no idea what the other side of the table looks like, right? Maybe some people are only watching the sample and not reading the treatment, so they brought up all these things we hadn't thought of. So that was a suggestion given to us, so I'm wondering, by the time we did that, we had a full cut of the film, so we were just doing the scenes, and we were doing one scene from Act 1, one from Act 2, and one from Act 3, and we put in between, the first one just said opening scene, and then the next one said kind of what had happened between that scene and the next, and then what happened. Are you saying that's not a good idea?
No, that's a great
That's
idea.
a good way to do it.
And I think
we finally got money at the very, very end. From the Berkeley Film Foundation.
So I can explain how it works for Berkeley Film Foundation. So in most applications, what happens is when we have the, window screen to watch the sample, there's a little box where you can write the description of what you're sending. Usually that's also a good place to explain selected scenes and have a little bit, because again, to read that and take valuable time from your sample to do it might not be the best, but you'll see when you apply, you usually have to write the password and have a little, text box. But I would maybe write at the beginning, like selected scenes, and maybe have a very brief title for each of the scenes. Or maybe, again, a title for each of the scenes, but not something that's explaining us the entire scene. That would be my suggestion.
Again, it comes back to the question of dropping scenes in or interview bites in without context. I mean, your viewer needs context. So if the cards are getting context across, great. I mean, it sounds like that was a necessary part, And I mean, I think that, again, none of this is hard, fast, set in stone, right? As a filmmaker, you can ask yourself the questions, does this make sense to me as a standalone thing? Is this tracking, right? And we have a whole thing about feedback coming up too. So it's great you bring that up now. But yeah.
Just adding to that really quickly, as a reviewer, I definitely watch the sample before I read the treatment.
I also do too.
Yeah, because you get a sense of people's visual storytelling abilities at kind of writ large before you get it, because a lot of people are good writers and translate over, and so I'm like, okay, are they a visual storyteller too? So I go straight to that first. So making sure that people get some of this, like you said, I think is really critical. I'm happy.
Can I just add one thing? Having done the Berkeley Film Foundation.
This is our president, everybody.
Yeah, but really, more importantly, I've looked at 13 years worth of samples. And you're walking a line, and I was sitting there thinking, what makes a sample work? And you're sort of selling two things in a sample. One is the story you're telling, whatever it is. It needs to feel unique. It needs to feel like you're the right storyteller. And then the other thing you're sort of selling is your own filmmaking skill set, which is why you don't want to just put up a bunch of talking heads in a row. Because if you do that, you're competing with another 100 samples, which are showing off good filmmaking chops. And so it's too early to apply to us or to anyone if you don't feel like, well, at least I'm showing some of my filmmaking chops here. Okay? So it's like, that just becomes an important thing. It's like, what is my story, and am I presenting it in a way that's somewhat unique? And are my filmmaking chops available to be viewed on the screen? And I don't know if that helps or adds to anything that they've said, but I think I'm speaking for many reviewers when I say that's what's pushing us to want to fund some films over others.
I've learned a lot. Thank you. It's been so fascinating. But I wasn't clear when I signed up for this that it wasn't including narrative film, which I'm working on, not a documentary. So, I've pulled a lot of great things from this, and I'm a novelist, so I get it for all of the things. But I'm wondering if there's anything that you can say that will help us narrative filmmakers about the sample.
I don't know that it would necessarily need to differ too much, right? The general principles, can you hear me, or do I need to do this? Okay. Yes, microphone? Okay. The general principles apply, right? You are trying to get across your storytelling abilities, right? And so I think that, with the exception maybe of the discussion around talking heads, whether or not you include that, I think that I'm not sure that there's too much divergence between documentary and narrative. Did you? As you were hearing this, did it seem like something wasn't applying to you?
Well, the thing is, I'm actually planning on making a short film, 10 minutes. So if my sample's 10 minutes, or that's the whole thing. So I haven't gotten there yet. I'm still in pre-production.
I can respond a little bit. I'm from Bayback.
I recognize you.
Hi. And I would say, having done some reviewing of narrative as well, I think your approach is good. Having a short as a proof of concept in narrative especially, I think is really strong. And other work, like if you've done a web series, if you can show, because I don't think people are expecting, because narrative is so expensive. No one is, at the earlier stage, if this is going to be your first major project, and it's just so hard to get everything together all at once, having some, at least like a scene, even if it's not like highly produced, people understand that. It's more like, again, how's this script landing? How are they able to capture the scene? How are they able to work with the cinematographer? I think those are the elements people are looking for in your narrative. So I think probably there's a lot of crossover, but I would focus more on that. It's
the narrative. Yeah. Okay. Because I think the challenge, I have my whole story mapped out. I don't want to show a little bit from each part. I want to show a compelling scene.
Yeah, but I think, but again, we would, in our review, we would look at a compelling scene and say this person has good filmmaking chops and has a good story based on the written proposal. So I think you'd be fine.
Good, thank you.
I think you can stay for the second hour. There'll be more later.
And as we said before, you don't have to fill the 10 minutes. That's the point. If that's the maximum amount. If you feel you can show your best work in 5 or 6 minutes, and promise, as Abby was saying, the promise that you have a great story, that's what we're looking for in samples. That you're a great filmmaker and that your story has promise.
I do have a follow-up though. I haven't yet seen the application for the narrative grant process for Berkeley Film Fest.
Yeah,
I have no idea what I'm walking into.
Sure. We're splitting it up this year,
right.
And so that is in the works. And I agree. I think having some firm instructions on how narratives can apply and what how it differs from our doc program will absolutely happen.
And that would be in the fall, right?
Yeah, we're going to do that.
We will have footage by then.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. We're gonna get some future.
If you have had like a short film concept that you published and shared and that like brought into small festivals and you want to like build off your short into a feature project, could you use that short as your sample reel, or would you want to completely show like the new footage and what you're working on? Continuing that, even though it would be somewhat intertwined with that?
Yeah, I think my first instinct would be that in your written application, you would expand on what else you would want to show, why you want to do a feature now. I think that would be really important to explain. And as we were saying, sometimes if it's, I don't know, a 20 or 30-minute thing you already shot, think very carefully about what's the best part of those 20 to 30 minutes. Something I wanted to show before we go to that is a little running joke we have among editors. Maybe you've seen this before. It's a little bit of when you incorporate every feedback. So yeah, this is a running joke among editors. So you obviously can do that. So you've done this beautiful sample reels, and I wonder how many of you share it with someone after you've done it? Yeah, very little people. Yeah, before you submit. For feedback, yeah. Very few. So feedback is really important. And we kind of talked about the rules of feedback, who, when, what, and how. So let's start with who to ask for feedback. So sometimes you're like, oh, I'll send it to all my filmmaking friends. They'll give me notes. That's great, but it would be great to, I thought about it, and I would think of 4 different, people you could share it with. Someone who knows about your story, someone who knows nothing about your story, someone who works in the filmmaking industry, and someone who doesn't work in the filmmaking industry. So as editors, we're talking about this, and what usually happens is like 3 days before the Berkeley Film Foundation deadline, I get tons of emails. Hey, can you review this and give me feedback? And I'm like, okay, 3 days before the deadline is not enough time. So that's where we'll go to, like, when to ask for feedback. So first, when you feel really strong about you have a solid sample cut. So that's really important. That you already feel you're showing your strongest points, characters, and at least 2 weeks before this deadline. So you have time to work on whatever people are telling you should work on. Yeah. So think about that, and then what do you want to get out of the feedback, right? Let people know specifically what you want them to give you feedback on. Like, is the story clear? Is it clicking? Is there anything you didn't understand? Because probably in your mind like, oh, this isn't that clear. Maybe I should ask specifically about that. Is there any specifically you really liked or you would like to see more of? Then how do you feel about the main subject? This is really important. Sometimes, even if they are, grumpy, as you were sharing with me, if the person is like endearing, well, then show that. Then if you have an archival heavy film, like was the archival, or even the one you use, was the archival relevant to the story? Did it add to the story or didn't, like maybe it didn't help that much? So I would say those are the main things. And yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that. We've each got them. It's like Donnie and Marie. Sorry, I'm dating myself. Okay, so how to receive feedback. Feedback is a great opportunity to take a breath and let someone else absorb the hard work that you've put into creating the sample reel. So as uncomfortable as sometimes people feel about asking for feedback or making themselves vulnerable to showing something they may not be 100% sure of, it's a really, really valuable part of the process of making a reel, getting that feedback. At times when you can be in the room with people watching, the experience of watching something that you've created with somebody else in the room after you've been working alone in the room, most of us, by yourself, when you finally have somebody sitting next to you, what you watch completely changes when you have somebody else in the room. I don't know if you've had that experience, but it's a very, very valuable part of the process. So it's important to take a breath, get zen, and be open to hearing criticisms and positives. You're not, you may feel like this is the final product that you're presenting to your colleague or your mom or whoever it is, but be open to receiving feedback for what is and what isn't working, and don't take it personally. That's a hard muscle to build up, but it's not personal. They're reacting to the story. It's not a judgment on you. It's a judgment on what they've watched. And it's really important to develop thick skin. I always say that as an editor, I've got really thick skin. Like, just shoot it to me, give it to me straight. Because the more truth you hear about what it is that you're presenting, the better final piece you're going to be able to create. So just remember, it's not personal. It's professional. And you don't have to incorporate, like if you look at the turducken up there, you don't have to incorporate everything you hear. I mean, you're gonna hear wide varying views often. You can. So you're gonna need to develop your own filter for what's most useful, and you're not obliged to to change it from Brahms to the Rolling Stones or whatever your score is, right? Like, you're not obliged to take every bit of feedback and incorporate it. But it's good to have it in your head as you continue both through finishing your sample reel and also as you continue on to your film. So moving on, the next topic we've got for you is working with editors. So when working with an editor, most oftentimes directors will push their sample reels through on their own. But if you are going to work with an editor, there are some steps to consider as you are making that decision. So the first step is choosing your editor, right? If you are entering into discussions with your editor, I'm just going to offer some practical suggestions, and that is to confirm your editor's rate. Have the conversations just like you would with a DP. Are they charging by the day, the week, the hour? Confirm that and agree to a duration and a price for your sample reel. Say, okay, if you charge $3,000 a week, I can afford you for a week, and that's all I've got. And if you tell an editor that, sometimes they'll say, look, I'll get you through, for that. But you want to negotiate that up front. Reels can often take longer than you think they're going to take. So it's just good to have that practical conversation from the get-go so that everyone's expectations around time and money are clear. And then confirm where the edit is going to take place. Is it going to take place at your editor's suite? Is it going to take place at your place? Just sort of confirm the logistics around it, and whether or not your editor's rate includes their studio and the software and everything else. Like, is it all part and parcel of their weekly rate, or do they charge something over and above that if you're working at their place? So those are just some important, just practical money things. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Well, something that we were also discussing is to ask the editor, what do you need from me? Do you need selects? Do you need interviews? How much material do you need? Right. I think that's really important because each editor will tell you something different. Yeah. Some people might be like, it depends. If it's a 10-minute sample, I want main interviews, I want selects from main scenes. So have those discussions early on of what would you need from me? Right. And like, how much time? Ask them okay, this is what I have, because sometimes you have 3 years worth of material. Some people have 5 years. Some people have like, oh, I did 3 test shoots. So it's not the same. So be clear with the editor as well, how much material they would have to go through and what you can do to prep for them before.
Right. So that is the second step, is be prepared. Editors are expensive. You know, when you begin to hire anybody, right? When it's not yourself doing the lighting and the sound and the shooting and everything, once you begin to hire somebody, you know, it can feel like you're fire hosing money. So when you are working with an editor, you want to be sure to be as efficient as you can with that editor's time, which means being prepared before you sit down in the room with them. So again, some very simple, practical, common sense questions to ask as you're engaging into a relationship with an editor. Confirm the edit program that they use, right? Are they using Avid? Are they using Premiere? Are they using DaVinci? Are they using Final Cut? Make sure that there's compatibility with the software that you have been using up until that point, if you have been. And this is another very critical thing. If you have not edited one frame of footage yet and you're hiring an editor to begin working with you, you want to make sure that whatever program that editor is going to use is going to be a program that can translate down the line if you're not going to work with that editor again in the future, or if you're not sure. So if they're working in some obscure edit, I can't even think of one now, but if they're working in an editing program that you've never heard of, that should be sort of a red flag, because you want to have transferability with your sample reel to, you know, be able to, the work that you're putting in with the reel, you want to be able to transfer down the line. Confirm drive compatibility. You know, I've got this 60 terabyte LaCie drive with a USB-C 3 connector. Do you have USB-C 3? You know, like it's a simple thing, but you want to make sure that you're bringing your materials to them in a way that they can access them.
Also Windows and Mac.
Windows and Mac, right. I mean, I know that's not as much a question these days, but it probably is, right? Yeah.
It's been
more
for
often
me,
than not.
and even
I
the
see.
drive has to be
Yes.
prepared to
Right.
handle both. If the director, for example, I have a Mac, so I edited on Mac, but I have worked with directors who, you know,
Are on
had their
Windows.
drives formatted to be able to handle it in
Well,
both.
Okay, great. And then, as Melina was saying, establish what you want your editor to know before day one and the edit begins, and whether they're going to charge you to watch all of your stuff or if that's just going to be part of background. And what you should have ready for your editors on day one, what you should show up with, is a drive with transcoded media or proxies, a drive with media that your editor can access. I like an organized full copy, if you've already been editing, a full copy of your project with a separate folder set aside for the editor for the sample reel, so that I can access, or as we're working together, we can like dip into other areas of your material as part of the creative process if we feel like it's necessary. And transcripts, if you've got them, synced scripts in your program, if you've got them. And then any music, archival, fonts. Fonts are an important one. If you've got a font that you're using, make sure that you bring that to your sample editor, graphics, and etc. So it's basically bring and prepare as much as you possibly can, do as much forward thinking as you can, so that you can be as efficient as possible from day one working with your editor.
Add one more thing?
Yes.
Also, consider time for rounds of feedback, because if you only budget for a week of editing or 2 weeks of editing, and then, you know, you probably as a director want to watch what the editor cut, be able to go back to them, give them notes. So I would also budget that time.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good point. And it's a critical point, because the last 10% of any project, whether it's a film or a reel or a trailer, that can take, as you know, it can take much longer than you think, the refining final stages. So yes, saving that time is a really good idea. I mean, it's critical. Yeah.
What about a non-disclosure agreement? Is that common?
Yeah. Totally fine. I mean, I don't know of an editor that would have a problem signing that. I mean, I often have to sign them for films. So it's, you know, so signing an NDA for reel.
So then when you're done, when you hand it over your entire
Yeah.
content to them,
Yes.
how do you know they like delete it when you're done? Or
Well, it's on there. It's on the drive that you've brought to them, right? I mean, like you've got to trust this person that you're hiring, right? So, right out of the gate, if you're worried about them pirating your stuff, I would say move on. You know, but in terms of where your material is going to live, often everything just stays on the drive that you've brought to the edit. So, signing an NDA is fine, pro forma. And you'll sleep better.
There any other questions about this or what we talked before? Oh, wow, super
Are many of you considering working with editors, or are you mostly trying to do this on your own?
On your own? How many are doing this on your own? Okay. Yeah, that's why we wanted the beginning part to be more practical tips, because really that's what we've seen at the Berkeley Film Foundation. I would say 80% are doing it themselves, and only a small portion, maybe if they already got some funding, can afford an editor. It's really expensive, so we understand. Yeah. Right?
Definitely, yeah. Most people that apply are doing this themselves.
Yeah. So don't feel bad, but again, as we were saying, every little thing that you can do to make your sample better, you're competing, is the reality. Again, I've been a reviewer for Berkeley Film Foundation, Payback, Video Consortium. You're competing with a lot of people. They're really good stories. It's heartbreaking to choose only some, but whatever leverage you can take, but by making it really polish, working, as Stephanie was saying, and sound transitions, selecting correct mics, doing a very light color correction just so it doesn't look flat. Those things go a really long way.
Well, I think we have time to show the reel.
So we have a reel from someone that's actually here, and he got money from the Berkeley Film Foundation, from the cycle, a couple of years ago. So Luca is here. And this, again, we want to show and then maybe discuss, but not in a way to... Yeah.
Not in a critical way,
Yeah.
just in sort of a way that we might review it or react to it. But one thing that's critical to point out before we play this is that this is not a to-do list. We're not showing you something that should be mimicked, or you should feel like because this was funded, this is the way to do it. This is one of the many, many approaches that is taken to create a sample reel.
Where are you? I think. Oh, there. Well, congrats. Yeah, so maybe we can discuss a little bit of things that worked, for us. Again, this is not to be taken as to do, not to do. It's just thinking a little bit, right? I think the first thing I would say is that it showed this very vulnerable community, these amazing characters. We can already tell, he has in his film. And even, for example, I was thinking about jump cuts and what we said before, but here they were used in a very smart way. It was an artistic choice. This character had, scattered thoughts. So that's how it was used. So that's something different. It was an artistic choice. And mostly what I liked is that we could see all his artistic choices, even with music, right? So
I thought it showed incredible access, incredible intimate access. And not only did the filmmaker have permission, it also showed that he was able to get continued sort of intimacy with these characters, which is something that tells me that as a filmmaker, he's taken the time to build their trust And something that can happen in films like this, that spend time with underserved or underprivileged communities, is they can begin to feel sort of exploitive, and this didn't feel like that at all. Like sometimes, it can really like raise your hackles if you, if the filmmaking just tries to make you too sad or tries to make you feel too much of anything. And this just it felt like it was presenting a world almost without judgment, and that felt super classy to me, so that it resisted the sort of, urges to overstate anything. So to me, I felt like that was very tasteful.
And I think aside from that, it also, as you could see, it was very polished. Like, how, the color correction, sound mixing, correct mic selected, ambient sound, all the choices, I felt were really polished. So aside from content, which and access, which it showed a great deal of it, these are little things that, again,
Yeah, they go a long way.
Yeah.
So one thing I didn't struggle with it because I was intrigued by what I was watching. For me, the opening character was very difficult to understand, and so I found myself just sort of thinking, okay, well, this is part of the drill. This is part of like who this character is going to be, and it might have gone on. It might have gone on a little too long, but I feel like if it hadn't gone on long enough, I would have just thought, I don't know, that it was a mistake. And I felt like because we were sort of we were sort of asked to live with this guy and listen to him, try to be intelligible. It's like, okay, that's going to be part of what this I'm going to have to do when this character's on screen. And so I caught back up with it. But it did take me a minute. And so I felt like that may not have been the strongest scene to open with. And for me, when I was watching, I've never watched this before tonight, I felt like by the time we got to the third vignette, I think it was the fellow on the phone trying to park his RV, then I understood where we were and why we were there. And I felt like it might have been better to have that up front, just because that set up the context of what was happening here. I need to park my RV. I've been on the street for a while. He just sort of sets up who all of these people are. And so in terms of economy of not wanting to use cards, I think if you didn't want to use cards to set up what you're watching, using a scene that gives you the necessary context first does that for you. And then it also, I think, gives you a little more patience when you hit these other the other characters that might be harder to understand, because the footage around that first character was beautiful. I mean, it was just really beautifully shot, and he was so quirky and kind of teddy bearish, and like you wanted to stay with them. I just wanted to know where I was, and that wasn't answered. It was answered a little bit more by the second one. I was beginning to figure it out, but the third one made it very plain. So,
something that's really sorry, and then we'll go to questions. That's really great that she said is like. Sometimes you do need subtitles, Also, the panels are very diverse. I'm a foreigner. For me, it was also really hard to understand that first part. Sometimes you have people who might be hearing impaired. So make your best judgments. But like sometimes it really helps to have subtitles, or if again, you might have a microphone problem, well, maybe that could help.
Right. But if you aren't going to subtitle it, because subtitling is like, it's a difficult decision to make, right? Like if you're going to subtitle one person, who else do you subtitle? So it can be tricky. So if you aren't going to subtitle people, again, that might be a reason not to open with that one. It's really tricky to understand, because then you're just asking these questions.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
So just to circle back to the fact that that these reels are within an application, it was also helpful just talking about access. Luca had explained that he had been working with an organization that was working intimately with these people, and it was also kind of in the context of Berkeley's city ordinances had changed and they were going to be forced to move. And so all of this was explained in the proposal, which was extremely important to the rest of the application, right? Because, like Stephanie's experience, just looking at this on its own, we may be not familiar with the context of this clip, but when it's all laid out and described in a proposal, then it all makes sense. So I just want to add to that. Also, I think Luca was in production when he got this grant. I just wanted to add that because, it is an early phase, but he was still able to kind of put this together with the footage that he had. So I believe it was production. I'm pretty sure. So,
one thing I didn't say in the presentation is. I always think it's a good idea to have the title of the film on a reel, and I also think it's a good idea to end on a card with your name and contact information. I mean, I know this is part of a submission, but to have this thing live alone, it doesn't hurt, to have that in there somewhere, so that this video document that you've created has a way of getting in touch with you at it.
Mm-hmm. What else should be included, especially in the first item?
I think the name of the film and your name, a film by you.
And usually the running time as well.
Of the trailer.
Yeah.
That's right, of the sample reel.
And sometimes a lot of people clarify not professionally sound mixed, not color corrected.
It depends on whether you want your title to be like, you want your opening card to just be very simple and feel more filmic, or if you want your opening card to have a lot more just sort of like, here's what you're going to watch, much more technical. Either is fine. Either sets offers your viewers a roadmap.
I think you had a question.
In this example, I'm trying to think of the proper ways to use title cards aside from like what you just mentioned, name of the film and contact. In this example, would you have put the information, like would you have seen a title card that's like, this is about this organization?
Well, again, I mean, I think that goes back to the point I was making about the placement of the vignettes themselves, because part of what this reel did so beautifully, I think, was just make me curious. Like the more it played, the more curious I sort of became, and I started to understand what was going on. And I think the peril of using a title card is that when you explain too much, then I know what's happening, and I'm not working with you to try to figure it out. So I think the only information I felt like I was really, because I was being pulled along. I was being pulled along by the footage. Like I was going with it. It's like I didn't have all the answers, but it was okay. I was craving names. Like I felt like names might have been the only thing that would have helped me feel more of a connection, like just a name, John, 42, whatever. But that's, I don't even, it wouldn't have been necessary, I don't think. An ID on screen, Berkeley, California, with a date, that could have helped, but you get it in the reel. So,
what I would add to that is that you also could have different versions of your sample reel. Like if you're showing it for a Kickstarter campaign, maybe you have this info because it's, as Isabella was saying, we had a lot of context of where this was, what was going on, what this camp was. But if he wanted to publish this as a Kickstarter campaign and people might not read this, maybe you want to duplicate that, sequence, that sample, and add all this little information that you think people, it's a standalone piece. So that would be something different. I would suggest that. Think who your audience would be, like if it's within an application or if something you're going to share for, I don't know, funders. You have their emails. They won't read it. They're not required to read a 20-page application.
That is one of the first questions I will ask somebody that comes to me is, who's your audience? Who's this for? So, yeah, it could be two different birds for sure.
I kind of wondered when you made the critique that it started perhaps in the wrong place. I thought it started in the right place, and I wonder if the filmmaker at any point will explain that choice to start there.
That's the beauty of film, I think, is that, every film resonates differently with every person on the planet, So, and to clarify, it didn't feel wrong. And I was pulled along. I think if it had felt wrong, I don't think I would have had the patience to stick with it. I think I would have started to, I don't know, zone out or something, but sure, it absolutely did. It absolutely did. Yes, I agree. Yes? Oh, sorry, Melina.
No, I think she was first and then we.
I just have a really quick question. If you're still in the stage of production and maybe you haven't chosen the title, a lot of times I don't choose the title until the very last thing that I do, after even a somewhat final cut of the film. And you were suggesting having a title in the reel. What if you're not sure? Would you want to see a title that quite possibly will change?
I guess that's the decision of the filmmaker, and it's really, I don't know, it's like a rhythm thing. I mean, it's not necessary. It's not necessary. So if you don't have a title, you don't need to include a title. Right?
And usually you would just add the words working title and people know that's going to change. That's like the code in applications or in samples that we know that's not set on stone. If you put working title and then the one you're thinking of, that's fine.
Film titles change all the time, in edit all the time. And it's very common. Yeah. And
yes. I guess I'm just a little confused about, let's assume that they had more of the film. A lot of the production was done. Would you want to have more of a story arc in your sample then, or are you expected to if more production is done?
I would say it depends on the stage. Again, maybe if he was early stage, but if he wasn't, maybe I would have expected more edited scenes, like interaction between characters, more, how is the story gonna develop, or if they're gonna, the camp is gonna close, what are the plans? Is there a day where, the city officials are gonna go to that camp? Could he capture that scene? So again, this is not a standalone piece. We had an application. We knew the stage he was in, but I think as you develop in the story, we expect more and more. If he was mid or late production, we want to see edited scenes a lot more. And if you're applying for post-production, grants, then we really want to see your storytelling chops. Like that, there you have to show everything.
Hi, and thank you. I'm wondering, this is like probably just super subjective and difficult to give like a solid answer, but do either of you have any kind of rubric for what feedback you should take to heart and what feedback you should kind of just like put on the shelf?
That's a really hard one. Well, I think, again, we gave like the, showing different people, some who are not in filmmaking, some who are in the filmmaking world. I think that would help. I think in general, well, if you have a producer or director, another person in your team, maybe you can talk about like, hey, what could really add to our story? If you don't have that person, I would stay with what resonates for you to make it better. Because again, you can't incorporate everything. You can't explain everything. You have limited resources and time to make changes. So maybe you take one or two tips or feedback you've gotten. But take it a little bit at a time. That would be another tip. Like, don't add everything on one cut. Add a couple of things, see how it looks from there, and then start adding from there.
Another reason it's a good idea to show your reel to more than one person is if you hear the same thing more than once, that is a good indication that you've got a speed bump. right? So, that sort of stuff. And if you, if you hear some feedback and it just absolutely doesn't resonate with you, if you're like, no, like, that's fine. That's fine. But again, it just falls into like being open to the possibility. There's no rubric. There's no rubric. But the more you do it, you definitely develop a sense for like, what feels like something you should absorb and take to heart, and what feels like something you can let go. And I'm a big fan of watching in the same room with somebody if you can. Not all of them, but just do it once. Like sometimes even my daughter, when she was very young, it's just like having a pulse in the room with you. Like she didn't necessarily like know what she was watching, but you watch what you've created differently if somebody's in the room with you. So that's very helpful for me. Sure. Yes.
I heard you say a couple different times, choose correct microphone.
Okay.
And at which point in the production are you talking about choosing the correct microphone?
So when you shoot, oftentimes with interview shoots or with live shoot, any kind of shoots, you're shooting with a boom and a lav, right? You're on your main subject. And they don't always play well together. So you're going to want to make a choice. And sometimes when you export, they'll fade. Right? So you want to select one or the other. In your final mix, they'll do a mix and then a mix down, so you're not having like issues with audio feedback or just sounding weird. So generally speaking, one is going to sound a little better than the other. So you're just going to want to choose that mic.
So it's the track, not the microphone itself.
Well, it's both, because that mic will be on that track. Like A1's usually, boom or lav, A2's lav or boom. So choose one or the other. Mm-hmm.
So mixing the lav and shotgun isn't correct?
Depends.
I think it really depends. I think that mixing them both is best left to your final mix. But if you've got a good set of speakers or a good set of headphones and it sounds okay in your room, go ahead and do it. But for sure, do a test export and make sure that they're not competing or creating an echo or something like that. Often using both can sometimes, not often, can sometimes be fraught with peril. So generally you'll select one.
What's the question up there?
Yeah, you mentioned not going over the time limit, and I'm wondering what your thoughts on going under. I thought like a red flag too.
No, we did talk about that early on in the presentation. It's perfectly fine. You're not obliged to fill up every minute of your duration. The ability to make a good choice is part of what you're demonstrating in a sample reel. So if you're choosing not to use all 10 minutes, that's perfectly fine. If you feel like you've done all you need to do to get your story across, put your best video and audio foot forward. You won't be dinged.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I hope we helped a little bit.